Hello, everyone. Welcome to Reiki Radio. I am your host, Yolanda, and today we have a very interesting conversation with a beautiful author and coach named Susanna Peace Lovell. Susanna authored a book called Your True Self is Enough, and she wrote it primarily for parents and caregivers of children that have special needs. However, I can tell you, as someone who read the book and doesn't have children at all, there was so much that I learned. Her story is incredible. She shares a lot about her experiences with postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, having to advocate for herself, and then later on having to advocate for her child, and what she learns and what she shares about communication and accepting and honoring our differences is just incredible. It's such a beautiful, beautiful story. I'm sure it will inspire you all. So, to learn more about Susanna and her book, visit her website, which is susannapeacelovell.com. You can also follow her on Instagram at Mama Peace. The links for her website are down in the show description. I hope that you all enjoy this gorgeous conversation, and I will see you on the other side. Okay, everyone, we are here with the beautiful Susanna Peace Lovell, author of Your True Self is Enough. And I want to thank you, first of all, for taking time to have this conversation with us today.
Thank you so much, Yolanda, for having me. I'm really excited to
I
see what
am
we're in
too.
for together, right? Mixing
Yeah.
our energies together and see what comes up. I'm really so grateful for this.
Well, I am too. I have to tell you, the book was incredible, and I'm not a parent. And I was so drawn in and intrigued by this book. I have a lot of questions for you. Um, but that aside, we haven't discussed this topic on the podcast yet. So I'm very, very excited for people to hear your story and for all of us to learn from what you have learned through the years.
Mhm.
So I just want to start off with getting to know a little bit about you. Um, in the beginning of the book, you shared a little bit about your childhood and always having this desire to be a mom.
Mhm.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that because that was so foreign to me. I was like, really? Like you just always like to be. Yes. So I'm just curious about the idea of motherhood and what was it that you really wanted to experience?
Oh, yes, Yolanda. So, well, I mean, I don't know. It was just something so innate from the very beginning. I just felt it in my bones, in my body. I do have a lot of siblings. There were five of us. I come from a pretty big family. My father is one of 13. And
Yeah.
so I think that I just always felt comfort in just family being around. We had a pretty tight regimen and schedule, and so we were together a lot in terms of sitting down together at meals, and we really bonded. We were all very, very, very different, and we still are today. But I just grew up in this sort of energy of just belonging and community from an early age, and it just happened to present itself in the form of family for me.
Yeah.
So I just, when I was younger, I just, everything I owned was sentient to me. So like my stuffed animals, my dolls, I mean, I would change their diapers, I would take care of them. It just, again, was just this nurturing piece of me that had to be expressed somehow. Like if I had, a dog, like a real life dog, not just a
Yeah.
stuffed animal dog, like that was my baby, right? So everything was my baby. My younger siblings were my babies. My youngest sibling was born when I was 13 years old. And so that really was like, I mean, I took her everywhere. She was my little sidekick. And I just have always felt very like maternal and wanting to take care of others in terms
Mhm.
of nourishment, like feeding people. I still am this way today. And so for me, I was like, the only thing that makes sense in my life is that, I'm going to be a mother someday and I can't wait. And I'm going to have 4 to 5 kids and I'm going to be so excellent at it because I've had so much experience and training. And, I didn't know if I was going to be an attorney or a bus driver or, whatever else, struck my fancy at the time. But for sure, I was certain that no matter what, I would also be a mother.
Yeah.
And so that's been very top of mind for me since early on.
Yeah. I was just very curious about that because then, as we'll get into the rest of your story, it struck me how there are so many different roles, I guess, that we may imagine. And we all have a lot of expectations, whether it's like the type of partners we'll be or whatever all these things are. And it's interesting what we learn through what we don't expect and
Right.
what we don't know. Yeah.
Right.
So I wanted to talk to you, start getting into the communication with children.
Hmm.
And even though you do, people will learn a lot, caregivers, parents, anyone with children that have special needs. But reading it again, I was like, well, wow, I think people need to tune into communicating with children differently in general, like across the board, right? So, could you talk a little bit about what even inspired this for you to write this book so heavily focused on the way we're communicating with children?
Well, first of all, I love that. I love that that was your sort of read on it. You're actually the first person who's ever brought that up in terms of communicating with children. So I appreciate that so much. And that's exactly so spot on. And I only had to learn how to communicate differently with my child because she wasn't able to communicate with me in the way that I had learned how to communicate with others my entire life. So it
Right.
really was like, that was, I sort of had to, if I wanted to have some sort of different kind of bond and connection with her other than just the energetic bond. So I first started writing this book as an article like 10 years ago in terms of like, wow, I just had a different vision of motherhood. And here's what showed up for me. And here's what was so unexpected. Newsflash, everything was
Yeah.
unexpected on this journey. But also, too, I like to mention that I've always been a writer. So for me, writing has been the best form of catharsis. I have kept a journal since I was 13 years old. I still have every single one of them
Wow.
since I was 13. And it's just like I can't not express myself through writing. And I mean, like, not even typing, like writing, like pen to paper, that sort of like proprioceptive input, like writing into paper and sometimes like, furiously writing all different colored pens. I'm obsessed with pens. I'm obsessed with paper. I know it's not great for the planet, but I just am.
Yeah.
And so I lean into that. And so for me, it's always been, my way of, expressing my innermost thoughts right in the moment. I have my journal with me everywhere I go. And sometimes I'll even have to like pull over to the side of the road and get something out, and it's just like an instant exhale and release for me. So, but the reason why I wanted to write something for an audience is because I found myself feeling so isolated and alone in this parenting journey, and especially as Arizona started receiving diagnosis after diagnosis after diagnosis. My daughter's name is Arizona, and I just felt like, wow, I don't know what I'm doing. This has been so challenging for me. I am super resourceful. I'm very tenacious. I'm well educated, and I still couldn't figure things out. And so it was very challenging for me. And I wrote this book for all of those moms and caregivers and anyone else who this might resonate with, parents, non-parents, siblings, whatever, who were feeling like, gosh, I just wish there was a little bit of like a beacon of light. Like I wish there was some kind of blueprint or roadmap or something that can sort of let me know that I am not alone and that there is hope for me out there, and there are different ways to arrange our lives if they are just completely, you know, different than what we expected, which I think all of us experience. Every
Yeah.
single person on this earth does. So that's, I wrote this book for me as my younger self.
Yeah.
So I wrote this book because I needed this so tremendously when I was in the trenches in the early years of motherhood. So
I,
it took 10 years to write, but here we are.
no, but it's beautifully written and very, very easy to read. I even love the format, which we'll talk about with your thought corners and our truth corners. But I wanted to ask you this too, because one of the things that struck me is how observant you were throughout the book, having this awareness of your child and the observation that you had, and even, many times not trusting your own intuition because of what you're being told by doctors, but you yourself were so observant. And the reason it struck me is because now a lot of people are distracted, and a lot of people aren't necessarily paying attention fully to their children, let alone anything else. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that, the importance for all of us of like just having presence of mind and paying attention, and the benefit of paying attention to your children, especially.
Yes, well, thank you for that important question. And I will say that I am not so sure if I could have learned to be as present as a mother if I hadn't had this particular child come through me.
Mm,
So I will say that very truthfully and vulnerably. I think that I didn't have, um, I just felt like I couldn't check out.
yeah.
It was almost like necessity in order to connect and bond with my daughter, and I really sought that out from an early age. But I just feel like it's such a practice. It requires intention and it requires consciousness, and it can look so differently every single day, in terms of choosing to be present and choosing to, sort of block out the noise. So it is a conscious practice that I lean into every single day. But I remember, early on, especially since Arizona couldn't communicate the way that I was expecting her to, I just felt like, wow, I know there's something more here for me and her,
Mhm.
in this lifetime together as human beings on this earth, right? I just knew that there was something more than me just being her caretaker, her caregiver. And so I just tried to lean into her world as much as possible. I learned lots of hints and tips from professionals along the way, some about what not to do,
Right.
and some people I leaned into in terms of, what they were showing me. But I just remember getting on the floor when Arizona was very young, 8 months, 9 months, 10 months, and just trying to get into her world, like physically, literally, like just on the floor, like trying to, get some kind of eye contact because that was not happening at all in those days. So it just started there, just getting on the floor with her, just being in her world. And I didn't know what I was doing back then. I still don't really know what I'm doing, except for that I've always wanted to have as magical of a connection as possible with this being that again chose me to be her mother, right? So it's been it's been a journey, lots of ups and downs.
Well, we have to peel back a little bit about you, especially
Yeah.
with what you're saying. So I do want to say that was one of the things I wrote down in your book. I'll just say you have these truth corners. At the end of the chapters, you have a list of like tips and recommendations and things that people can implement to really support communicating with children more effectively. I think even nourishing themselves through the journey that they're going through. But that was one of the things that struck me was getting into your child's world. I thought like, wow, that's a really um, beautiful idea. Even I mean, just to frame it that way, it made it a light bulb go off. Like, wow,
Mm,
what would that be like for people to really try to be in their child's world instead of trying to control or mold or shape what that is supposed to be? But it makes me curious about you and your background in terms of because I know you also practice Reiki and clearly you're very mindful and all of these things. Did you already have some practices with, energy work, spirituality, these types of things prior to becoming a mother, or was this something that came in the journey a little later?
yes, great question. I think it's always been there from the very beginning. I think that it has it has been highly activated since becoming a mother again, sort of in my, purview of everything. It's just like there is no option for me. I have to lean into a deeper, spiritual world and what's available to me. But I will say, growing up, I grew up in the church. I was, raised in a very Christian household. And so I think from early on, I always had a very sort of solid relationship with my God.
Right.
Makes sense. So I had like my God, there was the Jesus that we learned about and the God that we learned about, but I just felt like, okay, but I have my God,
Mhm.
And
I
so
do.
every time I was like in trouble for not, following the rules and being too worldly and secular, I was like, okay, but my God he's benevolent with me. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So I kind of always had that. So I've always had this sense that, there is something bigger than me. Sort of guiding the way, leading the way, knowing what is for me, is mine already. And so I just have always had that sense like I'm taken care of, I'm taken care of on this earth in this journey. So, but certainly, and I had started going down like more of like, spiritual path, conscious parenting, conscious, living before I became a mother. I've always been sort of a seeker, like a truth seeker, and like what else is out there? What's for me? I just, show me the way, show me signs, guide me. I'm very sort of flowy in that way, which is so the opposite of my personality in terms of like Capricorn being so rigid. And here we are, like, here's the plan, here are the boundaries, here are the structures, here's the timeline, here's this is what I'm wearing, this is what I'm eating, this is everything is all planned out. And yet I have this beautiful relationship with the flow of just the energy of life.
Mhm.
So I really feel like everything is for me, every circumstance, every situation. And so having that knowing, even when it's really uncomfortable and hard and challenging and painful, I have to know that it's part of this journey. So I found, well, Reiki found me really.
Mhm.
Also, I will say, when I was younger, I did, this was before it was cool and hip, but mixed Asian. So my father is from Taiwan. And so we grew up very culturally Taiwanese. And I suffered from migraines as a child. And so I used to go get acupuncture treatments at the early age of like 8, 9, 10 for these migraines. And it was not, again, it was not in a cool office. It was like in some dingy little, right, dirty, whatever. And the old Chinese man cutie pie that, smelled like herbs and everything, like just I would get needles. And to me, that was so helpful and impactful from early on. So I feel like, I've continued with acupuncture throughout my adulthood as well. And it's been so healing for me. And I feel like Reiki is almost like acupuncture without the needles for me. Like
That's what I
that.
used to describe it as. That's funny you say. Yeah.
You are the only other Reiki practitioner I've ever heard saying that in my entire existence, Yolanda. Okay, well, that's why we're here. And yeah, so my older sibling was practicing and I was like, wow, they really are, things are changing in their life,
Right.
And so anyhow, to make a long story short, I just feel like I was, leaning into every possible way to help me heal and feel less stressed out and feel more calm and balanced. And so I learned Reiki to be a form of self-healing for me. I never, was interested in being a practitioner at all.
Right.
But as we know, things just flow.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I'm glad that I asked you this because I also wanted to talk to you about your experience with postpartum anxiety and the other emotions that were erupting for you. Because one, you kind of hear people talk about this, but I think perhaps it's not as big of a conversation as it should be. But you will hear people talk about it. But the thing in reading your story that was interesting was in a lot of ways, it was like you were suffering in silence. Like even though you were seeking help, it was interesting that you were still functional. So here you are. I mean, like clearly through your words, very much you were struggling and having a very hard time, but you were still functioning. So I think, and a lot of times that as well, like we could hear someone say, I'm not okay, but we're looking at them. And if we think they seem okay enough, like maybe we don't really know the depth or the how truly impacted they are by whatever they're feeling. So could you talk a little bit about what that was like for you? Can you describe it, even for people who don't know what postpartum anxiety or depression is, and how you got through that?
Yeah, so I think and I believe that, as soon as we become a mother, I'm just speaking for myself,
Yeah.
we are forever postpartum. That's
Mm,
just my take on it. This was the most debilitating and scary time of my life ever, by an order of magnitude, the scariest time of my life. It's when I felt the most out of control. And the way that it showed up for me was, well, firstly, we have all these, enhanced hormones that happen when we are carrying a baby. And certainly after we give birth, they don't necessarily go away. And then you add on top of that now just this drastic change in lifestyle. I mean, drastic, like just overnight, you're expected to be caring for this little being. And, as a first time mother, I was like, I've babysat for hundreds and hundreds of hours in my
mhm.
lifetime. I've changed so many diapers. It's not the same. Okay. It will never be the same. And so my body was, physically in discomfort. Actually, when I gave birth, I had a really strong tear all the way down to my
Wow.
anus. And so I had stitches everywhere. And so I had ice packs everywhere. And I couldn't even sit down because I had so much pain and discomfort, all of the fun stuff that we don't really talk about so much. So I was physically in pain. My hormones are all over the place, right? I was like up and down, all these high highs and these low lows and tears just, I guess in the beginning they call them, like, well, maybe you have the baby blues and you're just
Uh,
sort of, whatever they want to call it. But really, it's just the physical, the hormonal. Now you have this big, huge life transition, having to take care of this little being that relies upon you, by the way,
right.
for everything, sustenance, for just living everything. And they just have their own schedule. So, sleep is something that is no longer guaranteed for a mother in terms of just having like a set amount of time or structure. And so you're really at, your child's sort of beck and call in the very early ages, very early stages. And so all of that compounded into just everything. I just felt so like out of control. So like I can't figure this out. And again, back to my personality and, being so type A and I've got it together and I'm so capable. I just felt like, wow, I'm not capable.
Right.
And how can this be? Because I've been planning for this day my whole life. you know,
Right.
I've been waiting for this day to come, and here it is. I should be ebullient. You know what I mean? I
Right.
should be like singing from the rafters. So yeah, all of that led to me just my heart was racing all the time. I was so worried that I was doing something wrong. I was so afraid to fall asleep because I was worried that I wouldn't hear my baby crying and needing me, even though she's like right next to me. Right. And I was so worried. What if I roll over on her? There were so many different things that were plugged into my brain and my psyche around all of the things, all of the things, the worries of new parenting. And so I just really took that on. And so after I didn't sleep for a couple of weeks, like literally did not sleep for 1 minute because every time I tried to settle, my heart would start racing and pounding. I fell into a really, really dark and debilitating depression. And again, that was a very foreign feeling for me because even though I know that I have experienced bouts of sadness and grief and depression throughout my life, it was always just sort of me. Like I could figure it out, I
Right.
could, go exercise or, write in my journal or whatever it was. But this was like so outside of me, so beyond me. And it was very, very scary. And you asked, how did I survive that time? And I will tell you that I almost did not.
Yeah.
Uh, I almost absolutely did not. It got to the point where my mom and my sister, one of my sisters, had a few kids of her own at the time. And so well, she was already a mother at the time. And so I just remember opening up to them, like, did you guys ever have this experience? What is going on? They're like, no, and so I just, again, then I felt even more like a failure, like more like an alien in this
Right.
experience. But they, got together and they were like, listen, Susanna, we will take the baby.
Mm.
We will take Arizona, whatever you need to do, we will take her. And so I remember going to see this holistic chiropractor and Dr. Khalsa, and he gave me this sleep mantra. And I repeated this sleep mantra over and over and over. This is after weeks of no sleep. I am ready, willing, and able to receive restful, peaceful, rejuvenating sleep. And I repeated that over and over and over again. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, I fell asleep for the first time in weeks. And I slept for 2 hours from 4 to 6 because at 6 a.m., Arizona woke up with the cry. And I felt like I had slept for years. I mean, first of all, I felt like I did it. It was because of me. I made it happen. And I remembered calling my mom because I was literally about to drop Arizona off with my mom and my sister that morning so I
Mm.
could check myself into some sort of facility and say, stick an IV in my arm and make me rest.
Yeah.
It was really so, 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 so scary. Um, and so that was the experience. And even though that day I felt like I could, finally fall asleep, it still took months and months and months for me to get into a rhythm of sleeping and receiving the right help from professionals who, by the way, were not even talking about anxiety or depression at all. Even
Right.
when I was telling them my symptoms, they still weren't saying anything about this postpartum experience. They were just like, well, you just need more sleep. And I'm thinking, yeah, but
Mm.
there's a reason why I can't sleep. Do we want to talk? Can we talk about that? No, it's just you're a new mom, da da da, get a nanny. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was like,
That was one of the wildest things. It's one of the things I wrote down too in reading that the doctors ignored the reason that you weren't sleeping. And it was just, throwing sleep aids at you rather than really getting to the why. Like, why is there this deprivation? But again, with your story, it's so interesting to think about how much we hear. Oh, when women give birth, of course, they're up all night, or the parents are up all night, the baby may be crying or this, that. But there's this expectation of like, well, that's just what it is. And of course, I mean, other parents get through it and other people get through it. So I think there's this idea that people just work it out, even though what you're hearing sounds a little crazy. It just,
yes,
I don't know. I don't know. There's something about it that seems like people just expect, like, well, yeah, that's what happens. I mean, the baby's going to be crying, people aren't going to sleep. But to think on top of all of that, your hormones are literally shifting all over the place. Plus, now trying to implement medication, which is also going to cause some chemical shift within your body, on top of the other hormones shifting from, it's a lot. I mean, that just sounds like a lot. But the thing about it, when you say you ask your mom and your sister, and they're like, yeah, no, we didn't go through this, it
mhm,
makes me think of how many people, again, probably suffer so much in silence and may beat themselves up because they think other people around them didn't go through this. So what's wrong with me?
yes.
So I wanted to ask you about that. Like, was there a lot of, questioning yourself? Were you blaming yourself in any kind of way? Or did you really understand this isn't my fault, so to speak? But I mean, who's listening to me?
Right. Yeah. Well, tell myself, I certainly did not have compassion with
Yeah.
myself. Let's just say it like that. I did
Right.
not say to myself, this is not your fault.
Mhm.
I said to myself, what's your problem? You've been dreaming of this day. This
Mm.
is your dream. You are living the dream. Susanna, you've wanted to be a mother. your entire life, like what's wrong? What you have, you know, this baby, you have this home, you have, a husband. I had a husband at the time, right? I had this whole picture of what my life was meant to look like. And so, and again, coming from somebody who was able to manipulate and maneuver my life the way that I wanted it to be in terms of, well, I want that job or I want to get into that college or whatever it is, there had been, not a lot of tons of disappointment for me, for
Yeah.
me in that realm of making things happen. And so, yeah, I felt like, I also didn't have a lot of friends who had kids. I was one of the first of my girlfriends to be a mom. And so I didn't really have any close people to lean on, other than my mom and my sister. And so I just, yeah, I struggled throughout my day. You mentioned that, you were functioning, and I was, but I was not present. I was like a zombie. I
Yeah.
remember that feeling, like thinking like I'm walking down the street, pushing my baby in a stroller. And, because of my heightened anxiety, I'd lost like a pound a day. So I was skinny, 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 to begin with. Then I gained like 50 pounds when I was pregnant. And then I was skinny, skinny, skinny so soon after I gave birth, because I just was like this, like my heart was just pounding, pounding, pounding. I was burning so many calories every day and breastfeeding and all of these things. And so people were just like, wow, you look so, wow, you really bounced back. Look at
Oh,
your body after baby. Right. And I was like, have at it, have at this anxiety diet or whatever you
right.
want to call it. It was awful. So then I felt like, oh, people really can't see me. They have no idea that I'm just trying to make it down the street with my crying, crying, crying baby. Um, yeah, I was like, just literally moving through life, like in the Spike Lee movies where the person
Yes. Just goes down. Yeah.
literally, that was me. That's
Mhm.
exactly how I felt
Wow.
for a long, 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 long time. So,
You're just making me think of, I remember a long time ago hearing, I think it was France specifically, how after women give birth, they are, they have access to um, someone to come and help support them, but it's like paid for by the government. It's a thing, right? And I know that at some time in your story, you did end up getting a night nurse. And I mean, the book is incredible. I would just say for anyone, whether you're a parent or not, I mean, it really is an amazing read. Yeah, I learned a lot reading your story. Um, but you did all the things. But again, getting to talk to you now, I'm just thinking of how many people may not be as vocal about the help they need or may not have the resources to get help if they need it. And how I just want to say it seems like it could be very dangerous for people to be in this state and not only have to figure out how to take care of themselves, but now there's also a child too. Like that just seems like such a vulnerable space that there would already be something in place for people who need resources that I don't know, it just seems like there should be something already part of the system, so to speak.
yes, yes, that is exactly correct. And actually, even culturally, a lot of Taiwanese mamas, and Asian mothers in the East, and the South, have, I wouldn't say like night nurses or doulas or whatever you want to call them here in America, but there is support for the first 30 days of a new mother's life. So it's a very strict sort of regimen in terms of the mother cannot get out of bed for 30 days. So that's a
Wow.
different type of that's a different type of like, I don't know, sadness or mourning, whatever might come up for you. For me, it would have been so hard for me to sit still, but someone comes in and they give you, herbs and broths to help with your milk production, and they take your baby, whenever, you need to sleep. They change the baby. They take care of the baby for 30 days straight. And then after the 30 days is when you introduce the baby to the world,
Mhm.
full moon sort of ceremony, right? and new moon ceremony, sorry. And so it was just that is kind of what other cultures do. And there's also a lot more community in different cultures. Certainly, yes, I've heard that also about, French postpartum experiences. In Sweden, I think the maternity leave is like a year.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Something like
Yeah.
that. As well as like a very lengthy paternity leave as well, right? So imagine all of the support that you are getting from the very first day that your child is born. And that is just not, that is not really something that you can opt into unless you have the funding,
Right.
personal, like privately, to pay for the support, which I think, by the way, is phenomenal that there are people that can be hired to do this for us here. We don't even talk about that enough,
Right.
honestly, because all we hear about is, oh well, I didn't have a nanny, I did it all myself, right?
Right.
Like, that's the marker for success.
Yeah.
That's what we hear about,
Right.
in the Western world. So that was even more, yeah, it was just even more depressing because I'm like, but I want to have help and I don't want to feel, judged and
Right.
shamed for needing help and wanting help. So
But you
yeah,
think about it historically. I mean, just thinking about stories and even the saying, it takes a village. I mean,
yes,
I think in older generations, there was more of a communal aspect for whatever reason. I mean, some of the reasons weren't great of why, but it was, And I think of even in my generation of me and my cousins, it wasn't just like we had, five mothers because our moms and our aunts, it was like an equal playing field
yes,
of, like who took
yes,
care of us, who we got in trouble by, all of the things. Yeah. And so even at that level, and hopefully people will start having these conversations and be more mindful of the importance of personal community too, and how much your friends may need you, whether it's going through postpartum or just other aspects of life.
yes.
Recognizing the need for us to be more communal again and really checking in with each other, holding space for each other, acting like family again, rather
Mhm.
than being
Mhm.
so distant and separate. Because, as I mentioned, reading your book and thinking, like, wow, would that have been like being so observant of your child? Like, again, I don't have children, but my friends and people around me, I'm always very observant of children because they're fascinating to me. I'm like, they're like
Mhm.
little
Mhm.
geniuses. Like, what are they
Yes.
doing? Like, just the things they do is amazing to me. Um, but I think we should be a little more observant of the adults as well. It we're just not paying enough attention to each other, which is sad.
Mhm.
But so
Yep.
I want to move along a little bit so we can learn more about your journey, and because it's amazing. You were watching your child and you had questions. You were really curious about, how she was communicating and behaviors. And then of course you hear a lot of times parents will compare, like, well, these children are doing this, my child's not. And you were so diligent with seeking out, support, making appointments, and doctors telling you, like, oh no, everything's fine, everything's fine. But you had this knowing, like, I have to keep going. I have to keep asking. Can you tell us what that process was like for you, and any recommendation you have for a parent who might be in that spot of like, everyone's saying everything's okay, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, I will speak to this intuition, right, within us all, and I will speak as my experience as a mother
Yeah.
specifically. There is this gut feeling, there is this, again, this sort of intuitive knowing that sort of won't let you settle, like won't let you rest until you can sort of understand what's happening. And I just felt like, Arizona is different. You know what I mean? There are some differences here. I'm not really understanding, her intention or understanding what she's doing, going from room to room, taking a pile of stuffed animals, stuffing them into my, bathroom drawer. 2 minutes later, taking them out of the bathroom drawer, running to the kitchen and sticking them into the cabinet in the kitchen. Like that was play that I
Mm-hmm.
had never observed before. And so all of these things, even though Arizona had words early on, and I know that for a lot of sort of developmental diagnoses, one of the biggest markers is maybe there is a speech or language delay. And that was not the case with Arizona. So even with her talking, though, and speaking, I felt like, but you're talking to the wall in the other room. So again, I didn't have any, I like autism was not even on my brain.
Right.
uh, but I just thought like, you're an interesting child. I think you're a little stubborn, because you never come when I call your name. You seem to know what you want, but you're not really asking me, you're sort of asking the ethers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I will say that I felt like every appointment that I had, I was hearing everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. She's developing normally. You have nothing to worry about. You, mom, are just a worried first time mom. So chill out, mom, right? You need to relax. And by the way, because I was so anxious already with the postpartum, I was like, oh, they're right. Yeah, I am anxious. I know that. There's something wrong with me because I'm anxious and I'm worried about my daughter. So I just kept knocking on doors, knocking on doors. And even though everyone said, oh, she's fine, I'm like, I know she's fine. I know there's nothing wrong. Stop using that language.
Yeah.
And there's something different, you know? And so I just kept seeking out again. This is one of those spiritual moments where I was like, I need signs. I need a guide. Tell me what to do. I am here to do what I'm supposed to be doing, but just I need some guidance somewhere, someone, please. So it was really that. And, the tenacity was just because I had this unsettled feeling within my gut that, that wasn't the right answer. It's not because she has allergies and eczema that she's not able to look into, fully immerse herself into the world outside of her. I just knew that wasn't the reason, because that was one of the things that I was told from professionals early on. So yeah, just going until I found the right person. I was connected to the right person at the right time. And at that point, I was able to receive the news and the information that my daughter had some developmental delays in the form of autism spectrum disorder, if we want to label it, right? So, that was when I was like, okay, so now there's a little bit of a roadmap here.
Right.
Everybody's situation, you meet one person with autism, that is one person
Yeah.
on the spectrum, right? There are some commonalities, and it's a very, 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 very wide and deep and broad spectrum. So I felt like, okay, there are some things that we can do that can be helpful to assist Arizona in showing up in this world, and just got started with therapies right away. But it has always been a check-in, even now for everything with her. Service providers, teachers, helpers, people who come in to do therapies or whatever else. Like it's always a check-in. Is this in alignment with who my child is? Early on, there was this one speech therapist who kept trying to get her to participate with more eye contact and like kept holding up these Skittles as like motivation or reward. And I'm like, number one, she doesn't like Skittles. Number two, like she's not a parrot,
Right.
she's not a
Right.
dog, right?
Right.
So can we try something different?
Yeah.
Anyhow, yeah, just leaning into that.
I have to
That
say too, it's interesting. And I will say people should read the book for this part because we don't have time for you to give too much detail about it. But the allergies too. And
yeah,
she
yeah,
was
yeah,
suffering with allergies. And,
yeah.
I really resonated with that because I grew up with not that severe, but like my mom knew I had some because I literally pulled out all of my eyelashes. She was like, "You looked like an alien." And that's how I knew. That was like the start of the knowing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I was like, wow, on top of, how much attention again, you had to pay so much attention to how sensitive she was. Because, you say, oh, I'm allergic to, I don't think people always understand how dire that could be to have exposure to things that you're allergic to.
Mm.
Um, but to hear, the reactions and how many things, but the level of what you had to make sure wasn't contaminated was like, wow, just from touching, she could have a reaction.
Yes.
There was just so much. Again, everyone read the book. I mean, your mind will be blown. I was like, oh my gosh, these things we don't consider, or
Yeah.
again, we hear, but and I guess it's a very human thing in a lot of ways. We do hear things, but we don't think it's that big a deal because we haven't personally encountered it, and if you do hear, like I remember one time hearing someone at their school, they had their child at the children aren't allowed to bring like peanut butter and jelly
Oh,
sandwiches because
uh-huh.
of peanut allergy.
Hmm.
But when we were growing up, that wasn't a thing. So to
Hmm.
hear that now, it's like,
Hmm.
what? These kids,
Hmm.
what's going on? This is wild,
Hmm.
right? So
Yes.
you really don't like take in like, no, no, no. This is a very serious thing. And this is why it's important because a child even just being exposed to it could be problematic. It's not just the ingestion. So
Oh,
anyway, I
yeah.
just wanted to mention that because that was a very interesting part of your journey as well.
Oh, yeah. No, and again, it's this thing about, okay, but don't be so rigid with your child. You
Yeah.
need to be like chill out, right? You're so anxious. I'm like, I know, because
Right, because
so many things.
yeah.
Uh, yeah. And we
Uh,
still deal with it till today. My
yeah.
daughter's about to be 18 and it's still every single meal.
But
Hmm.
that was why I was glad that you wrote it and were so honest and very detailed about it. Because honestly, if I hadn't read that in your book and I came across someone like you, I
Mhm.
honestly would have had the thought of like, this lady needs to chill out. Like,
Right.
what?
I
Like,
know.
I mean, it's really, truly,
Calm
honestly.
down. Yes.
Yeah. Like, are
Yeah.
you okay? But reading and having more understanding of why you were that diligent with your child, then it was like, oh,
Mhm.
wow,
Mhm.
So again, it is so important. I think one, for a lot of us to have more openness, understanding, even question what we don't understand more of, but for people to share more of their experiences. This is why I'm glad we get to have these conversations on the podcast because there's so much that we're not aware of, especially when it's not our personal, or someone may be listening right now and be like, oh my gosh, Susanna, you're speaking to me. I went through the same
Mhm.
thing and I
Mhm.
didn't know how to do it. So thank you for the book, but thank you for coming and have the conversation. So I want to go on to finding spaces for your child. You mentioned earlier something about um, a sense of belonging and community being very important for you
Mhm.
personally in your life. And
Mhm.
now there is literally this need for
Mhm.
real community for your daughter and, understanding and connection and people who will also be as aware as you are with, you
Mhm.
know, having
Mhm.
her in your space. So how do you suggest for people maybe in similar some situations find like right community or right schools? What did you have to do? What questions did you have to ask to
Mhm.
figure that out?
Yeah, in terms of like just finding your people, right? I call
Yeah.
it Team Arizona.
Yeah.
All of the people who have been in our lives as support folks. And then of course I have, sort of my chosen tribe
Mhm.
of, aunties and uncles and so on and so forth. I will say this, I know there are some parents who are like, yeah, I don't want to be with community. I don't want to be surrounded by people. I just kind of like to be doing my own thing. And by
Right.
the way, that is okay.
Right.
You have to find what works for you and what feels right for you and in alignment with you. I know that I've had a pretty solid group of girlfriends and guy friends, even from college days, who I've kept in touch with. And then, when Arizona's father and I got divorced when she was around 7, 7 or 8, I really leaned into that community so much. And so we built this really beautiful tribe. Like, Arizona just grew up with so many of my friends' kids, and they are really, truly like her siblings. So in terms of just, seeking out what it is that will feel good for you is really, I think it's so important to sit still. Um, I'm not a big meditator. I was reading on your site that you don't necessarily meditate a lot constantly either. I just, that's not me, but I do like to sit still. I
Mm-hmm.
like to sit still. I like to be in silence. I like to, create intentions around a particular sit and to just be like, what's here for me? What's next for me? What do I need to, who do I need to be connected with? What's going to enhance, this experience that Arizona and I are having, on this earth. And so just different messages and people and things will come through. And, again, leaning into that intuition, like, oh, this feels good. This feels like it's in alignment. And it could just be for a particular season. It could just be for like a year or a year and a half or 2 years, and then we move on because we're flowing, right?
Right.
Um, but in terms of like asking questions, there are a lot of times when parents are sitting in the waiting area of therapist's office. I know it's different now, especially since COVID, but back when Arizona was going to therapies in person, and we're doing that a lot more now too, I would talk to the other parents that were in the waiting area, like, oh, and it was so fun to be so open and vulnerable with them because we all know why we're here. We're
Right.
all
Right.
same sort of reason-ish. And so just asking like, hey, have you found anything to be supportive? Have you, right? There's a lot of information that you can ingest on social media. I've made some really phenomenal connections with different organizations and groups that support moms. And they have all been largely very positive experiences. But again, just, seeking out what you feel like it is that you need, but sitting still first to understand what those unmet needs are really and truly. And again, just knowing that those can change as the seasons change.
Right.
And so just to constantly check in with yourself, like what would feel supportive for me right now during this season of my life when, my daughter is transitioning into adulthood, right? It's different now than when she was 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So yeah, there are, everything is available to us. I
Yeah.
will say that.
Well, it's interesting you say. I was wondering how old Arizona is now because in the very beginning of the book, you have some bullet points of things that she wanted to share. I was
Hmm.
like, oh, wow, this is so beautiful. And that was before even getting into the story. I just thought, like, wow, these are beautiful ways of saying things because it really emphasized the beauty that we're all different. I mean, it just seems so simple, but brilliant what she shared. Like, we're all different. Almost like I got the sense of like, get over it. We're all different, right? But that's what makes us beautiful. And if we can be more aware and accepting and compassionate about that, then where's the problem? That's kind of the feeling I got from what she shared. So I wanted to talk to you about that. One of the things she said was kind of in the gist of it's okay not to be perfect, but be respectful.
Hmm.
Again, they were so simple, but brilliant. Like, I feel like for as adult, like we need to all read through the list that Arizona provided, right? I mean, it would be a better world we'd be in. But I wanted to ask you about that because it made me curious of the conversations that you and her must have
Hmm.
that she would even, have this kind of insight. So does she, do you have conversations around perhaps like do people treat her differently or is there something that's obvious to her about any kind of difference, so to speak?
Hmm. Yeah, she is aware, certainly now she's almost 18, as I mentioned. And she's in, she has all kinds of supportive services, whether she's in school, sometimes out in the community. And so, yeah, she knows that is different than her peers. she asked, we made a decision early on not to sort of bombard her with, by the way, here's your diagnoses,
Right.
and but we were very, very, always in conversation around, differences and yeah, the light it's really bright in here. It's really
Right.
loud in here. We were always narrating what was going on. So she was really able to, from the inside out, ask very honestly one day, Mommy, do I have autism? Am I autistic? Right. And she was about 9 or 10. And it was just like, yeah, actually, yeah, that is, a diagnosis that is, part of your profile in terms of getting services and support at school and outside of school. Um, but yeah, we've always had very, very open conversations with her. We learned, early on how to just create the space for her to be able to express in a way that she wasn't feeling like she was in trouble
Right.
or there was anything wrong with her. Even today, we have really, really so interesting, such amazing conversations, which, by the way, is, ties back to, what you were sharing in terms of like observing children in their genius,
Yeah.
and just like in their wonder and wow, there's no filter. Like they're
Right.
just saying what they want to say, what they're observing, what they're thinking, it's a beautiful thing. And we always want to try to shut that down
Right.
from a very early age. And so I've tried to do the opposite with my daughter in a way that feels safe for her. Like, there are some logical consequences that can happen if you're going to be too like forthright to the wrong person, right?
Right.
So I've been able to have this, flow of communication back and forth where, okay, tell me more, good to know, even if it's something really challenging. Like the other day, she was like, Mommy, you just have half a brain cell. I'm like, I know, it's because of you. Um, yeah, it's it's a little bit, it can be a little crunchy sometimes, but we know that we can take a minute, come back together and just have this space where everything is okay. We can talk about anything, you know.
Yeah.
But it's a practice. It is an intentional practice and
Right.
requires consciousness and presence for sure.
So I have to ask you about this before, we wrap it up, and I would love to know, what you hope people get from the book and who it's for. But um, for as important it is, and I think you make it very clear in the book, to, I want to say, what I was thinking about you, what I was imagining about you reading the book was how incredible this mother trying to really provide her daughter with the best of all circumstances. I just thought it was it was beautiful reading your story and seeing how, again, you were just very determined to make sure she had everything that could give her the best possible just life experience. And again, I think that goes across the board for all parents reading your story. I think it would be very illuminating, not just the challenges that you went through, but I want to say there was just like, it seemed like there was this knowing in you that
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe it. It almost felt like n- you didn't want to make a situation that could have been more difficult. You didn't want it to seem difficult or wrong or bad, or, like you were really just trying to create just a beautiful life expression for her, experience, spaces, all the things. I mean, it's the only way I can describe. But it made me wonder
Mhm.
too how important you feel it is at the same time that parents are finding or creating these spaces for themselves, because you all do a lot. I mean, not all parents, let's be honest, but a lot of you
Mhm.
parents do pour so much into your children,
Mhm.
and you
Mhm.
get left on the back burner.
Mhm.
And I'm sure you know from experience that can lead to burnout and all kinds of other kinds of things. So could you talk a little bit about that need for parents to not feel guilty about also pouring into themselves? And do you have any ways that you do that for yourself?
Yeah, well, I think it is an absolute non-negotiable. I think it is an absolute necessity in
Hmm.
this lifetime for us to take care of ourselves first, whether we are parents or not.
Right.
And I've always felt that way. Now, do I live that out every second of every day? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It
Yeah.
requires, again, that consciousness and setting that intention. But, if we think about what it is that we desire most in this life, and for me with Arizona, I had to have multiple epiphanies along the way like, okay, and I want to live a meaningful and purposeful and joyful life. I want to travel and explore and experience so many different things in my lifetime. And so, how can I do that with the responsibilities that I have as her mother? So I just feel like, it's very easy to burn out, right? It's very easy to be a martyr. I feel like that is so revered still in
Right.
this world. We start off with like, oh, how are you? Ah, man, I'm just exhausted, right? I
Right.
mean, just
Yeah.
like, right? Have we ever really started off with, I am so filled with joy right now,
Yeah.
times, right? But mostly we're just talking about, oh, I'm so tired. I mean, listen, I do it all the time.
Yeah.
Um, so it's just, pouring into yourself so that you have some overflow to give to your child is going to be the most tremendous and amazing gift, because the moments that you're going to show up for your child will be so meaningful. If you go take that 30-minute mommy needs a break, mama needs a break.
Yeah.
Okay. I can do that now that my daughter's older. When she was younger, I could not. That was
Right.
not available to me. So the ways that I poured into my own self back then was writing in my journal, when she was taking a nap, or making myself something delicious to eat because I'm so obsessed with food. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Um, you have to find the little ways that joy can be present for you. I don't like to call it self-care, because I feel like self-care is so overused these days in terms of like this idea that, okay, go to yoga, meditate, that's self-care. Maybe not for you.
Right.
What is your true like soul care longing? Like, what is it that, what needs need to be met, and yoga might not be it for you. Meditation
Right.
might not be it for you. But it might be sitting down by yourself outside while your child is at school or whatever. Maybe it's not taking the call from the relative who is going to make you feel bad about yourself or whatever.
Right.
Just leaning into all of the different ways that can be a little bit more full of joy for yourself in each moment. And again, it's going to constantly look different and be different. And we just need to be open to that.
Yeah.
But if we have the intention, like, I am the most important person in my life, like, treat yourself as if you would treat the person that you revere and respect and honor the most. How would you treat your best friend? How would you treat your mentor, your idol? Treat yourself like that, and then multiply that by thousands.
Yeah.
Um, and that's the way it should be, for sure.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. And, hopefully too, listening to everything that you shared, people will be more inspired to one, either um, be more aware of the people in our lives and where they may need help. But also, hopefully, we start to lessen that stigma around feeling bad for asking for help. Because a
Yes,
lot of people just, there's like this idea that we're supposed to be able to do it all and then be so exhausted because we've done
yeah,
it all.
yes,
Yeah. So hopefully, we will get to a place where it becomes normalized again to say, I need help. But then people actually show up to help you
yes,
when
yes,
it's said.
yes. Yeah, it's such a beautiful learning and practice.
Yeah. Wow. I have to say, I really did enjoy your book. Um, when I heard just like the general overview of your story, I was intrigued anyway, just because I'm curious about people. Like I'm curious about
Mm.
us and how we interact. And um, yeah, there's just so much about the layers to your story that were very, very interesting. even for someone who will never go through that. I mean, I'm like almost
Mhm.
50 now. No, there's no kids coming. But I wanted to say, I think this conversation is so important for all of us. And so thank you for the book. And I wanted to end with asking you that, like, who is this book for? And what do you hope that we all get from this book?
Well, I'm so grateful for you, Yolanda, because you read this book and, you know, quite frankly, might not be my quote target audience, but I actually don't have a target audience other than I just wanted something that could have helped me when I was just in the muck.
Right.
And so whoever picks this up and can learn something from it in terms of awareness,
Yeah.
even, the food allergy stuff, right? Just having that awareness and compassion and understanding of
Yeah.
like, wow, we are all going through so much stuff that we just don't know. I
Right.
love the reminder of, you know, they always say like check on your strong friends, right?
Hmm.
I've always been the strong friend. And
Right.
so I think that that is so relevant here. I think that honoring, others around us for exactly who they are, perfect, whole, and complete. I
Hmm.
think about that when someone's rude to me on the street or in the grocery store. I'm like, okay, compassion, have no idea what's going on with them.
Yeah.
Who knows, right? Who knows what their profile is, right? So
Right.
I just try to be as compassionate as possible, as starting with toward myself.
Right. Yeah, that's it. You remind me of I always give this example too. Many years ago, I had an opportunity to meet a Buddhist Lama, which I guess is like a
Mm.
teacher of sorts, and she was so lovely. And she said a lot that day. It was like a 1 day class type of thing. She came, I was doing Taoist meditation, whatever, and she came. But what, with all that she shared, the one thing that really stood out to me was she was telling the story about um, how to not be so frustrated with the world around us. And so she gave the example of, like we have people driving in cars, and if their music is loud, and just because it's not our music, we're so annoyed, like, oh my God, this person, but how that affects us by being annoyed by someone else encountering joy. So she's
Yes.
like, in those moments, make
Oh,
sure you
so
look
good.
and say, may all beings encounter joy.
Mm. Mm.
And then for me, that translated into when people are driving crazy, I'm just like, oh my God, may they make it safely to where they're going. Because I
Mm.
don't know what phone call they may have gotten. It could be no reason. I don't know. I don't need to know the why, but it would be better for me to be in that state of may they make it safely where they're going with harm
Mm.
to none rather than being mad. And now I'm not even paying attention to how I'm driving because I'm so mad, right? Yeah. But you just reminded me of that with what you shared. So I just wanted to say, Susanna,
So
thank you so
good.
much with
Oh.
everything that you shared in the book, that you shared with us today. Could you please let everyone know? Now, the book, Your True Self is Enough, that title, incredible.
Mhm.
Um, do you have time to just tell us a little bit about the title? Do you have
Oh,
a moment? Okay.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Your true self is so I had another title in mind until my daughter didn't want her name to actually be in the book. So she is, merely listed as the letter
Myriad.
A in the book. She's known as A in the book. Um, so our compromise was, okay, well, then you have to come up with the title. And so your true self is enough is actually the words that she wrote in the foreword of my book. So she was like, well, let me just, so I was like, so let the readers know what you want them to know
Mhm.
about this book. She's very self-conscious around not wanting her business out there.
Yeah.
Understandably so, which is why this book has taken so many different iterations to reach this point of how it is presented and published today. And so one of the things that she, said that she wants everybody to know, is that your true self is enough. So those are words from her. And I was like, perfect. Perfect. My job is done,
It is, no, really, it is a perfect, it's such a beautiful title. And I know that it is available online. We can get it on Amazon, where other books are sold, like Barnes and Noble, these kinds of outlets. So everyone look it up, get your copy. I mean, it really is such a beautiful read. Even give it to your friends who need it. You know, again, like you do highlight it, it is a great book for parents and caretakers of children with special needs. But I mean, after listening to Susanna, you know who needs this book in your life. You know exactly who's coming up. But could you let everyone know how to connect with you and how to learn more about your work?
Yeah, thank you. So my website pretty much has everything that you need to know about me, in terms of working with me or getting to know me or, taking advantage of any of the materials and offerings that I have. My website is my first, middle, and last name.com, and I'm going to say it, Susanna Peace Lovell.com. And I have my a link to my book, which is on Amazon, and I also have some, free downloadables. I also offer an online course, self-paced, for, life management for special needs families, an ultimate user's guide to creating a thriving life. And just different ways to connect with me. I'm very reachable. I'm very approachable. I'm here in Los Angeles, California, but I do so many things virtually these days. And I am just here to support my people in this
Yeah.
journey, as much as I can so that you feel less alone.
Yeah. That is incredibly beautiful. And I would say, you know, just looking at like the site and even your social media, you have um it's cute. Like it's so authentic, you
Oh,
know, like very real, like the way that you post
yeah.
it, what you share, because most, you don't see that much nowadays, but it's very beautiful in that way. So we'll make sure
Thank
that, of course, we
you.
have the website down in the show description, as well as the link to the online course, so everyone can connect with you and read this beautiful book, Your True Self is Enough. Thank you so much, Susanna, for being here
Thank
today.
you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Okay, beautiful alchemist. I want to say a big, big, warm thank you again to Susanna for coming to share her work, for writing that incredible book. The book again is called Your True Self is Enough. And you can learn more about Susanna and her work at susannapeacelovell.com. The link to her website, of course, is down in the show description. She also has a beautiful Instagram account that you can follow. Her Instagram is at Mama Peace. And again, just like I shared with her, even though I don't have children, the book was an incredible story for me to read as well. It was very interesting to I learned a lot actually through reading the book. So definitely recommend it. It is a beautiful, beautiful story. And if you want to learn more about me and my work, be sure to go to theenergeticalchemist.com. Don't forget, I have the Reiki retreat coming up in September here in San Diego. So if you want to take levels 1 and 2 with me, then join us in September. Just reach out to me for the registration link. You can learn more about that on my website as well. I hope that you all are having a gorgeous day, and remember to always journey in love.